Hey everyone, John here, and we've got more Nintendo Switch 2 news. Now, on the very same day that Switch 2 was announced, Marvelous, the publishers of Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, were very clear in saying that the game would be on the cartridge, whereas Nintendo had a lot of circles of misinformation about whether their Switch 2 editions would, and it turns out, yeah, they will all be on the cartridge, but Marvelous clearly knew what they were talking about. And they've actually gone a bit more in depth about exactly how this is being delivered. So let's go over to Marvelous's website, where there is a whole Q&A page, an FAQ, about the Switch 2 edition. So first, what is actually included in the Rune Factory Switch 2 edition? You get higher resolutions, faster frame rates, and support for the Switch 2 controllers, the Joy-Con 2, including the mouse mode, which brings greater precision and flexibility to village building. And the upgrade pack will be €10, £10, or $10 Australian dollars. I'm not sure there's a American dollar price there. But this right here is the interesting part. What is the physical Nintendo Switch 2 edition? The Nintendo Switch 2 edition is a red 64GB game card that includes, in full, the Nintendo Switch game and the upgrade pack. There's no need to download the full game. Simply insert the card into either Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch 2 console, and the correct version will launch automatically. So, what they are saying there is the red 64GB Switch 2 game card will work in a Switch 1. So if you put that Switch 2 edition into a regular Nintendo Switch, you will just get the standard Switch version of Rune Factory, which we haven't heard before. And what's really interesting about that is in the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, there's actually a bit of information there showing you the differences between a Switch 1 and Switch 2 game card. And the Switch 2 game cards have a little latch on them. So even though the shape is basically the same, that latch, presumably, won't allow you to insert them into a Switch 1. So maybe it's the case that Switch 2 editions are like a third variant of game cards, that there's there's this Switch 1 game cards, right? And then there'll be a Switch 2 game card, and then maybe a Switch 2 edition game card, which has the same latch as Switch 1, but the capacity of Switch 2? I don't know exactly. But according to them at least, and there's no reason to doubt them because they were right originally, Switch 2 edition game cards will work in a Switch 1. So just so that we're totally clear, if you buy a Switch 2 edition, you get a red game card with everything on the card. There's no downloads. They do specify that in some cases, maybe there will be updates or patches to download, but that's the same case of any game, right? But yeah, you can take your Switch 2 edition and play it on a Switch 1, a Switch 2, and there's nothing to download that isn't necessary. Which is great, but that's just something Nintendo haven't communicated themselves. But Marvelous have been on top of it with their Switch 2 edition communication. So, maybe get Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, because just to show their appreciation for being the only clear ones in this whole debacle. Now, the next piece of news is about an unannounced Nintendo Switch 2 game. And this was spotted on the PEGI rating board and has since been removed. But for Assassin's Creed Shadows, right here you can see it's rated 18 for PlayStation 5, Series X, Series S, and PC. But a few days ago, we had another platform there being Nintendo Switch 2. And I don't think this is a crazy surprise. Like, Ubisoft are always pretty eager to support new systems. And Switch 1 had its fair share of Assassin's Creed games, but Shadows is a pretty good-looking game. So to get that running on Switch 2 will probably have some sacrifices. I mean, we're seeing that Star Wars Outlaws is looking a little bit choppy on the Switch 2, but it seems like this game is coming. And I'd imagine there'll be a presentation before the launch of the system, because so far we know of the first month or two in terms of first-party outputs. There's a lot for Nintendo to communicate, and clearly a lot more for third parties to communicate. But it does seem that Shadows is on the way for Switch 2, which is awesome. Can I just talk about the Tomagotchi game a second? Because there's some cool mouse features in here. So in the Switch 2 edition, there's some exclusive mouse mini-games. And in one of them, you aim the controller with gyro, and you use the sensor in an interesting way, where you sort of throw your hand over the sensor as if you're launching a ninja star, and it just goes straight out there. It's very similar to the Mysterious Murasame Castle Nintendo Land minigame. And I think this is just a really cool use of the mouse sensor. Like, not using it to actually point, but instead as an extension of gyro aiming. I think that's rad. Cool. Anyway, let's keep going. Now, taking a further look at the Switch 2 website, let's peep at the Pro Controller 2, which is actually a lot cooler than it seems. We've got a preview about the Switch 2 hands-on itself, but 128KB had a great video just focusing on the Pro Controller 2, and I urge that you check that one out. Lots of cool features in there. But what's really interesting on the Switch 2 website, and this is something people are only really picking up now, is we actually found out the charge time of the controller. And the Switch 1 Pro Controller takes around 6 hours to charge, whereas the Switch 2 Pro Controller takes around 3.5 hours to charge, while still holding the same 40-hour battery life. And that's with the battery capacity itself actually being smaller. It's rocking a 1070 battery this time, rather than a 1300 battery. And the controller itself is actually lighter, I think in part because of that. It was 246 grams on the Switch 1, and now it's 235 grams for the Switch 2. So it seems like just a universal upgrade all around, but many impressions are saying the sticks are basically silent when you knock them around, they just glide really easily, the D-pad feels better, the texture of the controller feels better, and then of course you get those paddles, you get HD Rumble 2, you get the better gyro. Many who've tested the controller have said it's their favorite controller of all time, although of course we've got to get a extended hands-on to really make a claim that big. But it just seems like a great little controller. When Digital Foundry started analyzing Switch 2 games, they noted that none of them seemed to be using DLSS, which is a pretty big part of the system. Like, that's what's going to make it punch above its weight. So what gives? Where is DLSS? Especially when Nvidia themselves confirmed that DLSS will be a part of the system. Well, CD Projekt Red got back to them, and they confirmed that Cyberpunk is in fact using DLSS, and it seems to be a low-capacity version of it. So if you look in the distance, you can see artifacts that usually belong to DLSS, like dithered fog in the background, or some parts of the environment not having the aliasing you'd expect from a low resolution. But it is worth noting that the footage in the Direct is pretty old at this point. So this area here, showing crowds of people, has lots of frame rate dips, whereas in the actual hands-on demo, that same area wasn't producing the same dips. And that demo itself, the hands-on one, was 7 weeks old. So not only is the direct footage from an old build, but then the actual hands-on footage, or hands-on demo, is also an old build. Not as old, but still pretty old. So any analysis here will be pretty moot when it comes to the actual retail version. This is an old build of the game. So the actual implementation of DLSS may vary when this game releases. But it does seem that across the board, Switch 2 won't be using the full-fledged DLSS, and it's probably more of a low-performance version, which is still exciting. It's going to mean most games won't be pushed to their limits in terms of like 240p resolutions, but it also means you probably shouldn't expect that many games, at least modern games, to be pushing a native 4K, or at least a DLSS 4K. But regardless, yes, DLSS does exist, and it is in Cyberpunk, but the results right now aren't exactly too noticeable. And you know what? I thought I was done, but a few more things. So people have noticed that on the store pages for a few Switch 2 games, it says, please note, this software does not support Nintendo Switch Online paid membership save data cloud backup feature, which is a mouthful to say. That's on the Breath of the Wild page, it's on the Donkey Kong Bonanza page. Honestly, I make nothing of this. I wouldn't flip out. It's weird that it's here. Yes, it's very weird that it's here. But no such notice appears for any of the Japanese sites. This is only for the American and European ones. And it reeks of a mistake. Like, why wouldn't they? Why would they not? Why would Donkey Kong not support cloud saves? Why would Breath of the Wild not support cloud saves? If Breath of the Wild, the standard Switch version, does support them, what possible reason would they not on Switch 2? Like, why would you upgrade it to lose that feature? It makes no sense. So I wouldn't flip out. I'd hold your horses on this one. If it does launch, and indeed no cloud saves, weird as hell. But it feels too weird to be true. So let's just skate past that one for now. And let's go to the last piece of news, which comes from our businessman buddy, Doug Bowser. Doug has said something regarding 3D Mario. Ooh, what did Doug say? CNN published the following. And then, of course, there's Mario. Nintendo didn't reveal a new mainline Mario title during its Switch 2 announcement, but Bowser hinted that it may only be a matter of time. Stay tuned, he said. You know, we have a long catalog and a long list of intellectual property that I'm sure will make its way to the platform. That's nothing. That's nothing. That is nothing. That's nothing, Doug. That's nothing. But, yeah, that is a tease for Mario. If you had any doubt, did you think Mario was going to skip the Switch 2? I guess he skipped the GBA, kind of, right? It's not unprecedented, but yeah, stay tuned, says Doug. They've got a long list of intellectual property. That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and we will catch you next time with I'm sure, even more Switch 2 news. It doesn't stop. It never stops. By the time I publish this, there's probably going to be something else. Okay, bye-bye. See you later. Ciao. Au revoir.